Hey buddies, Miss Puggy here, coming at you with another Borderlands 3 video. Today we're getting a new Flak build that's all about fadeaway and dealing tons and tons of damage with crit. And what's a better weapon to deal crit damage than the King's Call or the Queen's Call? Now the reason why we're using that is because the King Call and the Queen's Call, I'll probably be referring to it as the King Call for the rest of the video, has this interesting property. When on critical hit, it spawns 3 projectiles that split away from the enemy and then homes right back onto them. And when you combine that with fadeaway, those projectiles also crit. It just does crazy amounts of damage, as you're about to see. But before we get into it, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. You have no idea how much it helps me out. We are super close to getting monetized on the channel. I cannot wait, and let's get into it. And as I said at the beginning of the video, we are using the King's Call. The King's Call pistol is really good. It has the anointment, at least mine has the anointment. While fadeaway is active, weapon damage is increased by 150%. This build is going to centralize in dealing the most amount of damage during fadeaway. Your damage might fall off a little bit in between the fadeaways, but we have a few items in the build that will allow you to get your action skill up as quick as possible. But first, let's talk about the King Call. The King Call does great amounts of damage. It does really good critical damage, and it has this really interesting property. When you hit with a crit, it spawns projectiles that home back in on the enemy that deal also good damage, especially if you have fadeaway active, because those also get the crit property as well. Another cool interesting thing about the King's Call is while I was using it, I noticed I was getting lifesteal. I didn't actually know it until now, but King's Call does have lifesteal on it. It gives you 12.5% of all damage you deal back as lifesteal, which is really cool because it did help me stay alive during these certain parts during the Malawan takedown. And we're doing the Malawan takedown in the background because a lot of you voted for a takedown for my next gameplay show off, so we are doing that just to please you buddies. Now the King Call out of the way, let's move on to an interesting choice on this build. We are using a ZHEITSEV'S not for the debuff, but for the constant barrage of debuff projectiles we can give to enemies, so we can proc some skill tree points that allow us to get our action skill back really quickly. See, with the Z-Eruption, with Megavore, those projectiles have a chance on critting, which allows us to proc one of our action skill points by the name of head count. Each time we hit an enemy with a crit, it does give our action skill back quicker. So the tactic with this is basically use the King Call, go into fadeaway, shoot a bunch, and then when it's done, switch to Z-Eruption to get your action skill back as soon as possible, because you aren't able to crit reliably with the King's Call, and the King's Call does run out of ammo really quickly, which is very unfortunate. So it's not a reliable way to constantly proc head count after fadeaway, so I like to use the eruption for that little trick right there. We do use emote spamming. I don't use the mouse wheel for that. Personally, I just use the arrow keys on my keyboard to emote spam, but if you want, you could just throw grenades during the animation as well, just spam it as well. But emote spamming is the fastest way. If you're on console, maybe just do grenade spamming. And I forgot to mention, the King Call, when you hit with a critical, it returns 3 ammo into the magazine, which is convenient because 1 shot equals 3 ammo. So the King Call with fadeaway allows you to have basically infinite ammo, which is really cool. Next, let's move to a non-surprising entry in the build. We have a Revolter, of course, with action skill start, activates the shield ability, which gives us shock damage on all our weapons and damage in general, and also gives us increased fire rate. The Revolter is just a staple shield on most builds, as you guys know by now, so I'm not going to talk too much in depth about it. Basically, every time we activate our fadeaway, we get increased damage for a long time, so it's very useful. And the fire rate is pretty nice. We have a cloning Hunter Seeker. I would like to have a mitosis Hunter Seeker, but we are just dealing with cloning Hunter Seeker. Now, usually use the Hunter Seeker to proc critical hits to activate some skills in the skill tree to give you a lot of ammo back in your gun, but the King's Call doesn't have a lot of magazine, and it uses a lot of magazine faster than you can shoot it, so this little trick that you see in a lot of builds with the Hunter Seeker for Flak doesn't actually help that much, so we are mainly using Hunter Seeker for on grenade throw. It does help us get some magazines into our gun every once in a while. Maybe sometimes we'll get a chance to shoot additional time before it runs out of ammo, but most of the time it doesn't happen, so we just have it for really the anointment to increase the damage by 25%. Then we have Bounty Hunter. The Bounty Hunter is a great class mod for Flak. Every time we deal damage, we have a chance to activate our kill skills, which is very useful. And then all the bosses are treated as human, beast, and robotics, which allows the hunt skills to deal increased damage and proc all of its effects, as opposed to just 1 to every single boss you have. We have 5 points in the Hunter's Eye, which just increases our damage overall against bosses, which is very nice. With secondary stat, weapon critical damage, pistol damage, and Jacob's weapon damage. Really a god roll for our King's Call, so that's very nice to increase our damage by a lot. When creating this build, I was debating whether or not I should use Stackbot class mod as opposed to the Bounty Hunter class mod, but I found the Bounty Hunter class mod to be able to reliably increase our damage overall more than the stack bot. Stack bot does increase our damage every single time we hit a critical hit, which can be really useful against fadeaway, but with the time I tested against Great Ward, the stack bot, when equipped, made me kill Great Ward almost equal to or less time than it took to kill them with Bounty Hunter. So I decided to just go with Bounty Hunter since overall it would be better. And plus being able to activate our kill skills when we shoot enemies is very nice in case we for some reason don't have our kill skills out there. And finally we have a Pearl Ineffable Knowledge. The Pearl is obviously really good. It has great damage multipliers in the damage formula that allows us to increase our damage by a lot, and it increases our magazine side by a whopping 73%, which is really nice, and the 16% fire rate is nothing to sneeze at. We're mainly here for the consecutive hits damage. The consecutive hits anointment was nerfed, but that did not affect the Pearl itself, so the Pearl is still able to deal a lot of damage with its consecutive hits and wasn't nerfed as the other consecutive hits, so the Pearl is still a really good artifact to use in most builds. And just in case I didn't drill it enough into your brain, the main tactic you want to do is go into fadeaway to proc all your skills and your anointments, throw out a grenade to increase your damage by 25%, and then just start milling the enemies. As soon as fadeaway end, I recommend to switch to Z Eruption to constantly spam the projectiles to activate head count to get your fadeaway back, because the main damage you're going to be dealing is during fadeaway. Oftentimes I underestimated the badass enemy in front of me and wasn't able to kill him because I didn't have fadeaway active. Sure, with a couple of precision shots with your aiming and hitting critical spots, you could kill the enemy, but I find it a little bit more reliable and easier to kill the enemies during fadeaway, despite me having, I would say, decent aim. But you guys be the judge of that. Now let's move on to the skill tree. Let's go down to the red tree. The red tree is pretty freaking stacked, if I don't say so myself. Most of the damage is going to be coming from the red tree. So mainly you want 5 points into Stalker to increase your total amount of damage for your Hunter kill skills. You mainly want to get your kill skills. Anything that's really useful. I don't find Second Intention to be very useful because we don't really need reload speed on this build because the King's Call reloads really quickly, or most of the time we aren't going to be reloading at all. I thought at first Leave No Trace would be really useful, but it actually isn't very useful because you don't get as much ammo as you need into the King's Call because it consumes 3 ammo per shot. So if you wanted to, you could potentially put no points in the Leave No Trace and put it somewhere else, but I left it because whatever. 3 points in the head count is very important. Max out the skill no matter what build you're doing because it increases your action skill cooldown by so much. Most of the time your damage from Flak is going to be coming either from your action skill or during your action skill, so it's always important to have that if you guys don't know that already. 5 points into Hunter's Eye with 5 additional points with the class mod just to increase our total critical hit damage, armor damage, and damage reduction against all bosses because of our class mod. 5 points to Ambush Predator, mainly to get critical hit damage. Max out points in Two Fangs. This has the potential of basically giving us an actual shot, which could basically be thought about having a Infernal Wish 25% of the time, so it's very useful to have that to optimize your damage even more. 3 points in the big game to make your kill skills a little bit more effective. 3 points in the most dangerous game, just another kill skill we can activate with a class mod, increases their damage by a lot. 5 points in the Grim Harvest. This is very good, increase your action skill damage and gun damage, which is the name of the game with this build. 1 point in Galactic Shadow to increase our critical hit damage, and then finally 1 point in the Megavore to allow us to abuse head count with the Z Eruption and other guns. Also, I usually forget to mention it, but I'm going to mention it now. I'm using a Spider Ant Scorcher. Spider Ant Scorcher increases our elemental damage by 10%. There is a pet that allows you to increase your critical hit damage by 5%, but I found the elemental damage to be a little bit more useful in case you have some downtime with fadeaway and you still want to shoot with the King Call. Of course, overall, if you're only ever going to be using fadeaway, like most of the time with this build, the critical hit 5% multiplier on the other pet would technically increase your damage more than the elemental damage here, but I still like to using Spider Ant Scorcher because Spider Ants are the best. And they're very versatile. That's just bias at that point, not math. Next we have 5 points in the Vicious Attack, which is just another Hunter skill, which does benefit from one of our Hunter skill amplifiers from the red tree. This is basically increases our total damage, which is very useful. Eager to Impress is very good. Action skill cooldown is reduced every time you kill an enemy. This is very useful. I find that it's more useful on a rack attack build than a fadeaway build, so you could potentially put less points in this, put those extra points somewhere else, but I find that the skill tree is kind of maxed out as much as it can hand, so there isn't a lot of places you could put to increase your damage, but I bet you guys can find something if you really wanted to. 5 points in overclock to increase our fire rate. 1 point in lick the wounds just in case you get downed, because it really does feel really bad to get downed. I don't have any launchers on this build. Of course, you could tech it into a launcher to help you fight for your life, but lick the wounds does help me get up in case there is no enemies around, which can happen if you use the Z eruption wrong, which has happened to me before. 2 points to turn tail and run. You can put an extra point in here if you get rid of 1 point eager to press, as said earlier, or getting rid of your points from leave no trace to put into turn tail and run, because this pretty much just increases your damage while you're standing still by a crap ton and your fire rate, so it's very useful in case you don't feel like you need to move around during a boss fight. Like when fighting the final boss of the Milo 1 takedown, I didn't need to move too much because he wasn't damaging me and I was able to just kill him before he was able to attack. But next we've got into hidden target, which can increase our damage by 30% in case they're not targeting us, which is useful to have just in case. 3 points in the fast in the furious, which increases our gun damage, and then 1 point in the power inside, which basically increases our damage when we activate our action skill, which is very nice. And since the King Call has lifesteal, you'll be at full health most of the time when you activate your action skill, so the damage is doubled. And then finally we have 3 points in the Persistent Hunter. Persistent Hunter is just really good on any fadeaway build or Gamma Burst build, but Persistent Hunter basically just increases our action skill duration by 45%, just allows us to keep fadeaway out there as long as possible, which is very good because you want to be in fadeaway as much as possible with this build, and it increases our gun damage by 12%. Let's do a real quick recap of the skill tree. We got all the way down in red, all the way down in green, and just 3 points at the top with blue. These are my Guardian ranks. These are my Mayhem levels. And if you're looking for any other level 72 builds that is really powerful, I have a couple on the channel already. I'm just going to list a couple that are my favorite, and if you like any of them, they'll be on the link on top right of the screen. First, let's go for a Flak build that spawns infinite drones with the OPQ system. It uses a low-level death rattle with negative magazine size to allow you to infinitely spawn drones. Combine that with Infernal Wish allows you to spawn 2 drones per shot, which just allows you to just spawn an army of robots behind you, and they will kill anybody you point at. If you want to build with Moze that does crazy amounts of damage, 1 billion damage in fact per fist hit with Iron Bear, check out my Bear Fist with a flare. It one-shots pretty much anything, and I was able to deal 1 billion damage per hit with one fist, which is absolutely crazy, so remember to check it up there on top right if you're interested. Then I have an Amara build that does 1 billion damage with phase flare. It uses a needle gun and fantastic light to allow it to constantly proc and move everywhere like a little pinball. It does 1 billion damage very easily, and it uses death blessing as well to optimize your gun damage. Next we have an OPQ system with Minesweeper. This build is a Moze build that optimizes in crit damage just like this build via proccing the Minesweeper, which can proc over and over on itself with Pull the Holy Pin to allow you to get practically infinite ammo if you're really lucky. Plus that build allows you to get infinite ammo with the OPQ system without having to spec heavily into the green tree with Moze. And finally, if you want a rock attack build that does 1 billion damage with the Fish Slap, try my Fish Slash plus Unleash the Dragon build. Each time you send out a fish with the rack attacks via proccing the Peregrine, it does 1 billion damage, and then it applies a fire dot which ticks for 200 million damage per dot, which is absolutely crazy. It's able to kill all content and any boss you want. And if you want to try this build out, there'll be a save file down in the description and comments as always, so don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and I hope y'all have a great day. Bye bye.
And the last shall be first to immerse in a pass out heat, facing him out with a moxie melt till he woke up drowning in tchotchke hell. War in a cave with a torch on a wall, then a window arrangement of porcelain dolls.